much for
Are you okay?
yeah. No,
Okay. That was Chris.
okay.
Sorry.
Something I did or was saying. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, as Amanda said, I have been a part of Decoding Dyslexia now as a board member for almost about almost 5 years now. I will give a disclaimer. I'm not an educator. I'm not a literacy expert. So I also apologize if you were hoping one of our experts was able to make it, but I'm a parent who, out of need for my situation with my daughter, sort of became an expert and learned what I had to so that she was able to get what she needed. So that sort of brought me to Decoding Dyslexia a while ago. Yeah, I'll share a little bit of our, you have it. Sorry. I'll share a little bit of our journey as well. So I can go on to the.
Hold on. I don't know which
one.
I'm sharing on. Okay, there we go. Here we go. It's this one.
Okay.
All right. This
So
one's
just,
video. This is recorded.
Just a little agenda of where we're going, and I'm not sure. I always love giving presentations that are interactive. So if questions come up while we're in the middle of something, if you're
Perfect.
okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm okay with it being interactive. And if there's things that you really want to focus on, or there's specific things that you'd like to discuss, I'm open to have this go in whatever direction is most helpful. And if there are questions that I personally can't answer, I'm always happy to bring them back to the rest of the board, where we do have some pretty impressive literacy experts on our board, former RIDE employees, Susan Brady, as well as is a consultant for us, and she is one of the experts in the area. So we have a lot of talent in Rhode Island when it comes to reading. So yes. I'm hopeful for where we're going. So kind of just give a little overview of Decoding Dyslexia. We can talk about components of reading, what dyslexia is, science of reading and structured literacy. Then we'll go into kind of what it looks like in the school and what we can do sort of for our children and moving forward. And again, any questions or anything specific that anyone would like to discuss, I'm totally open for it. So this one has a lot on it. I won't read it all, but basically Decoding Dyslexia is kind of a parent-driven grassroots movement. It is nationwide and also in Canada. Decoding Dyslexia Rhode Island started in March of 2014 with Suzanne Arena. She's been amazing and so passionate. And the other members of our board, very similar to me, have had personal experiences, and sort of our journey and what we've learned, we realize that we want to do something at a bigger level, because we see what our child has gone through and really want to make an impact. So we kind of, our three main areas we talk about are educate, advocate, and legislate. So we always try to educate, whether it's parents, whether it's school districts, on sort of evidence-based best practices. Advocate, we sometimes work directly with families if they need help. We aren't paid advocates, but really just trying to help families, especially, in times of crisis when they really don't know what to do. We're there to support them, sometimes attend meetings as well. I was at one this afternoon. And then on the legislative side, I think that was the newest part to me, but I think probably something that has the most impact, in terms of, we were really instrumental in the Right to Read Act. And I think I'm very hopeful for where we are going as a state. So that has been a really powerful kind of advocacy to get involved with. So that's really us as a whole. If anyone, I'll make my one pitch. If anyone is interested in taking on, a membership role, or would like to learn more, attend some meetings, we are always open to educators, to parents, to anyone. We're just looking to grow this. We also, through Rick and some teachers there, we have sort of a professional group, the Rhode Island Science of Reading, where a lot of our board members who are professionals, educators, are really sort of driving that ahead from an educator perspective. And so then we have some parent only things so that, you know, everyone has their protected space. And again, we're all trying to work together, but we also do sometimes need to have open discussions. So we really try to hit both the professionals and the families. So this, you know, again, please, if people want to dive deeply or stick to very high levels or say, I already kind of know all this stuff, just give me the sign and we can get to what you want. But, you know, really just as a basic understanding of the components of reading, it's very complex. All of these strands in Scarborough's reading rope really have to work together, come together to develop a skilled reader. If we look at it at a very high level, we can look at the simple view of reading, which is down there at the bottom, where we talk about, thank you, we talk about language comprehension and word recognition or decoding as sort of the two main skills that we need in order to produce reading comprehension. And that requires sort of fluent word recognition and then language comprehension. And we can't really have reading comprehension without either one of them. So there, you know, if our reader is weak on the word recognition on that decoding side, it sometimes doesn't matter how strong those language comprehension skills are. If you can't decode the words, you're not going to be able to comprehend. So that's kind of an overarching, very simplified view. If we apply that then to Scarborough's rope, what we see then is sort of, again, these sub skills that go into both the word recognition side of things, the decoding and the language comprehension. And there are a lot of complex skills on the word recognition side: phonological awareness, decoding, and then that sight word recognition. I prefer to say it as sort of orthographic mapping so that we can get our students to where they're sort of automatic. You know, they're not taking that slow and labored decoding step with each words. They build those neural pathways so that they can recognize parts of the word, combinations of vowels, for example, and they're able to be very automatic with their decoding. And then that leads to fluency, which is definitely needed to have comprehension. On the language comprehension side, this has been an interesting piece for me, just personally, not fully understanding it, but really interesting if you think about, you know, background knowledge in a topic. There's a study that I think maybe many of the educators will know. It's called the baseball study, where, you know, you take students that are good readers and struggling readers, and it's a story about baseball. Some of those struggling readers have a lot of background knowledge on baseball. Maybe they play baseball, they really love it. They actually can read a little bit better, can comprehend better when they have background knowledge in the topic. So that's something that we want to develop through that language comprehension piece. And that can be done in the early years or with struggling readers in listening to stories, either audio or read alouds in the classroom, but you want to continue to build that background knowledge. And what we see when a child has that word recognition or decoding issue, they're not reading as much. So they don't have the opportunity to really on their own build that background knowledge. And this goes hand in hand with vocabulary as well. The more you read, the more new vocabulary you're exposed to, and the more you build your vocabulary, which helps with language comprehension. Other things like language structures, syntax, semantics, those are all really important to really understand the meaning of what someone's saying or written word as well. Verbal reasoning, inferences, really understanding kind of, you know, what the intention of the writing is all about, and literacy knowledge, you know, in general, print concepts, genres. These are all of these sub skills go into that kind of language comprehension. And without either of these pieces, the word recognition or language comprehension, we really don't have skilled readers who are able to fully fluently recognize words and comprehend. So this just kind of keep this in mind, a very complex process. And we all know now that it's not natural. You know, we can't just say it'll click one day and you'll get it, because I think as a lot of us know, that hasn't been the case. And when we see it in our child, and you think there's no way that this is going to just click. Once you understand this, I think you really do start to see, oh yeah, it's a complex process. So just to set a little context that we're all on the same page, we recognize, and a Rhode Island law as well, the International Dyslexia Association's definition of dyslexia. So it's a specific learning disability that's neurobiological in origin, and it's characterized by difficulties with accurate and or fluent word recognition, and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. So that's that lower part of Scarborough's rope. That whole bottom portion is where really our kids struggle. And that's really what we need to focus on in terms of interventions. So, you know, there can also be secondary consequences. They can include problems in reading comprehension, because again, if you don't have one, it's really tough to build the strength in the other. We do know now, looking at Scarborough's ropes, ways to keep building that language comprehension so our children don't lose out.
I have a question. Are there proven programs that, you know, teachers and intervention help children post decoding?
Yeah, so I think in terms of proven, there's a lot that do have research behind them, and through the high quality curriculum law that Rhode Island's put in place, and also you know, research that's on the International Dyslexia Association in terms of endorsements from them and other groups as well. There are programs that have research behind them, that they make improvements. You know, I don't know if there's a perfect program that exists. And I think this is where, in Rhode Island, at least, our Right to Read Act combined with the high quality curriculum is kind of the best of both worlds, because we're developing deep knowledge with our teachers. And I have to thank any teacher that's gone through that training. It seems pretty intense. I haven't done it, but you know, they're really finally getting the knowledge that they need in order to teach reading. So I think having that proficiency knowledge in the science of reading and structured literacy approach of what's needed, then you can take a program and you can be critical of it. You can say, all right, they do this great, they don't do this great. I don't think there is a perfect, I don't know if any educators would love to chime in, but
No, exactly what you said. There is no perfect program.
Yeah.
Are different in their needs as well. So we have a variety of resources.
Right. And I think that's again where having this knowledge for teachers, and something that I learned on my journey, you know, at my school district, my daughter's now in 10th grade. So it's been a while. Right to Read wasn't around. And so the struggles early on, it was more, you know, balanced literacy. That was what the intervention was. It was a disconnect to me. I didn't know how to teach reading, but it just didn't seem right to me for whatever reason. So that's what sort of led me on my journey to spend my nights learning about dyslexia. Once everyone went to sleep in the house, I went to work and learned kind of, there is all this data out there, but it exists in neuroscience and different areas of universities that haven't sort of made that bridge to educator prep programs. And once I understood that, I kind of thought from a professional perspective, I'm an engineer, and I thought, gosh, if 20 years into my career, someone had told me that, you know, how we taught you, you know, probably wasn't the most efficient or best way. It's not really going to get most of those 25 kindergartner kids in front of you set up for success for learning to read. I think that would be pretty tough. So I think the fact that, you know, that intensive training really gives teachers that understanding and ability to then apply what tools they have in front of them. And hopefully we'll also be getting better at sort of data analysis, and not only collecting it, but then really using it to the next step. I think that's something I gravitate to. Again, as an engineer, I'm kind of a numbers and data person. But I think I think we're getting there. And unfortunately, I don't think there's one perfect program, but there are many that have data behind it.
I was wondering if you heard the structures program.
I hadn't really, and then I did look into it, and I spoke with Harry Curto, who's one of our board members, used to be at RIDE and now with the Reading League as their National Science of Reading project coordinator or something there. She's very knowledgeable in this. And I think she actually reviewed structures while she was with RIDE in terms of their program and the training, and she spoke very, very highly of it. One thing that I found interesting, and this is just a parent observation on it, now that I have a high schooler and sort of seeing where the struggles are, I really loved that it kind of has that morphology piece and looks at roots and prefixes and suffixes, because what I'm seeing is as the words are getting bigger, as the content is getting harder, that's where I'm seeing sort of that disconnect and that struggle with my own child. And I really liked that it has that portion to it. So yeah, I've heard very good things about it. And I think as long as, teachers are going through that certification, which I just learned that they are, that's.
Yeah, the district is almost everyone in the district will be trained by the end of the year.
Separating new teachers.
New teachers are just starting, that
Sure,
profile,
sure.
but we started training right when the law
That's amazing.
had passed. So we've been in this for 3 years. So the
Mhm.
first year we had a pilot
Yeah.
go through it.
Yeah.
Last year we started training everybody,
Yeah.
completing that this year.
Yeah. I think that training piece it does make a big difference. Again, my personal experience, we were a district that did use Wilson, but we didn't have anyone certified in Wilson. They took the 3-day workshop, and what I saw with my daughter's situation was sort of rushed through, quickly getting to, book 6. But that's not where her skills were. She needed to learn them to mastery, as we'll see in a slide, or I think actually on the next slide, if you want to go ahead to
Yes.
it. Obviously the brain functioning and structure of our kids with dyslexia, they are wired differently. They are not using the most efficient pathways to read. We'll see the top view here is a skilled reader. I don't like to say non-impaired, but a skilled reader. And there's very specific areas of the brain that we now know from all of the research and evidence that's out there, this is really how you efficiently become a skilled reader. And then if we look at a child with dyslexia, and my daughter actually went to MIT and participated in a clinical trial there with Dr. Gabrielli, and had a functional MRI done, we see, they're really not using the efficient parts of their brain. But the nice thing with the brain is we can develop those, but it takes repetition. It's just like training for a sport. We can't expect to do it once, move on to the next skill, and you've mastered it. So another thing that I'm sort of hoping as once we get through this training and now we look at implementation, is really building in that time to give a lot of practice, give a lot of corrective feedback for these kids, because that's where we're going to move that fluency piece. I think, they'll learn the skill, but as we see probably with everyone's kids, one day they seem to get it. The next day it's like they've never been taught it. And I'm sure teachers can appreciate that too. So that's just that, we got to just keep practicing and giving that immediate corrective feedback so that they can start to develop those neural pathways that will make fluent reading possible.
Yeah, so I know many school systems don't recognize a child with dyslexia until they're about in 3rd grade. I'm a teacher myself. I'm so late too. Are they doing something? Is there something happening that will encourage school systems to diagnose earlier so that they're not missing K1 and 2?
Yeah. So I think we're, again, as part of this transformation that we're on in Rhode Island, I do think we're We're going from that, like, wait till they fail model in third grade, where it's hard. It's hard to then, as they transition to fourth and fifth, when do you even have the time in their schedule? And now they have developed neural pathways for bad strategies, right? They're compensatory strategies. Those are drilled in there. So there's a lot of unlearning to do for these kids. I know my daughter, and it's tough. Her immediate go-to is to just go back to guess based on the first letter. We gotta get that pathway to stop and work on these more efficient ones. So I think with, again, the combination of now we have high quality curriculum that we're implementing, and all of our educators being trained in the science of reading and all the data on how the brain learns to read and what components of reading are required, those sub skills. If we implement screening early, and I think most districts are moving towards this, we can start screening in kindergarten. I mean, even pre-K, once I finally learned everything and I saw the signs you could kind of think about in pre-K, I thought, oh my gosh, I could have told you my daughter was going to struggle, family history, couldn't rhyme, still can't remember the days of the week, all these things that I thought, and I felt we went to a good private preschool and they had little checklists, but I just don't think we didn't understand all of this research and data, and again, how the brain works. So I think as schools get through this training and we have these screeners in place, and hopefully a strong MTSS program, we can, as soon as we see some risk, we can do some targeted interventions, see how they're responding to it, use that data and continue that cycle. And hopefully if we can catch them in kindergarten and first grade, some kids, even if they're diagnosed with dyslexia, maybe the gap isn't that big. Maybe they don't have to get to a tier 3 or special ed. Maybe they need accommodations, but that's when they're the most capable of unlearning the bad stuff and really developing those neural pathways. So I think that is my hope for the future around, is that's where we're heading. And I think, again, now that people have tools, you have, communities of practice to sort of review data and act on. Again, my situation 10 years ago, it'll just click, and we, even with the diagnosis, she's not far enough behind yet, we won't qualify her. So I couldn't get to that Wilson program. I was fighting for it. Once I did get to it, it wasn't even implemented with fidelity. So I think we're coming a long way, and we can't look back. I think we look forward and we see, what parents are bringing to the table. We're educating ourselves, we're forming things like Decoding Dyslexia. We're going and creating legislation to get what our kids need and working with the schools. I think we're on the right path. I'm hopeful for the future.
I can say I have seen like tons of studies about if a child is diagnosed at third grade compared to a child that's diagnosed pre-K to K, and the gap and how significant. It's so much harder to close that gap after third grade. It's almost impossible. And just from study, I have so many different things at my house, and then from pre-K to K, if you catch it, there's still going to be a gap, but it's not going to be as significant as after third grade. Yeah.
So I think we're learning as parents, as educators, and I think we're on the right path. Once we get through training, another area that I'd love to focus on is, okay, the kids now in middle school and high school who aren't going to be able to benefit from what we're learning now. How do we help these kids? Because again, the brain can learn at any time. It's definitely harder. But making sure that we're also really focusing on those decoding skills. I know, at least from my experience, now that we're in high school, it's a lot of comprehension focus, and we got to step back and look at those sub skills. Okay, if they're not a skilled reader, we can look at the two big components again, those word recognition and language comprehension. do some assessments within each of those areas. Where are their weaknesses? And then that's what we should focus on. And then also continue to still build the other skills so that they don't now become a deficit for the child. So, all right,
Thank you.
yeah. So these are just kind of common characteristics that we see, you know, with kids with dyslexia. The big one, obviously, that decoding, that word recognition piece, sounding out words, spelling, which is that same sort of neural pathway, just the opposite, sometimes a little more challenging. Writing, reading smoothly, that's that fluency, that's that automaticity, being able to decode, you know, very quickly. Sort of recognizing common sight words, that again is that orthographic mapping. We don't memorize 30,000 to 70,000 words or whatever it is Kilpatrick, I think it's Kilpatrick says, but we have now created these pathways and we know what these smaller letters mean, and we can quickly decode them. Basically at sight. Rhyming, again, I had mentioned that. And then comprehension does start to have an impact. Again, probably not in those really early ages when there's a lot of read alouds, but as you continue, and if your child isn't picking up a book on his own, or isn't trying to, you know, read a magazine or read the signs as they drive, which I know that was my child for sure, they're missing out on all those language comprehension skills, developing their vocabulary, developing their background knowledge. So those are sort of those secondary consequences that come from it. And then these, I think I've probably covered most of these, just some more additional signs. And again, that preschool piece, I think to me was pretty telling. Family history is such a big one. It was, for us, it was my husband's side. So it really wasn't even on my radar. Then again, once you learn about it, you start talking to your in-laws and things, and you kind of start to learn. But I mean, if there's one piece of advice, as soon as you enter a school district, let them know about a family history. And again, now that our teachers are educated, they will know to keep a close eye, and hopefully we will not, anytime there's signs of not meeting a benchmark, there will be some intervention to try and get that student on grade level or meeting the benchmark. So just a quick, just two quick kind of definitions. I think I've probably already thrown these words around, so my apologies that the definitions come late, but the science of reading and structured literacy, these are kind of big things under that Right to Read Act. And again, as anyone starts to delve into the research and really try to understand it, these are kind of the overarching umbrella terms that are meant to capture all that. So the science of reading it's really a vast body of research that explains how people learn to read. So that's all that cognitive science, neuroscience. It's been studied for a really long time. And again, for me, when I was able to find it, you know, in my nighttime classes, I thought, gosh, where is this disconnect? Why don't we know this more broadly? But then you kind of learn some other pieces of the puzzle that have gone on. But there is a lot of research and a lot of data, and it's not just recent. You know, in the past 10 years, that National Reading Panel came out in 2000s. That was 20 years ago. There's even stuff well beyond that. So there is a lot of data. So the science of reading is not a program. It's not anything you can physically do. It is just all of this data, and making sure that we recognize it and learn from it and continue to learn from it as new research comes out. And then structured literacy. So that is an evidence-based approach to teaching literacy that integrates speaking, listening, reading, and writing, kind of multi-sensory. And it provides, these are the big components in my mind: explicit, systematic, diagnostic, prescriptive instruction. And typically it's in a lot of the key areas on the word recognition side, but also some on the language comprehension. But really it's that explicit, systematic, and diagnostic is what our kids with dyslexia, they absolutely need. It's critical. They will not progress without that. But what we also see is that it's really beneficial for every type of reader. So it's just to provide a little context on words that I'm throwing out. So this has a lot of words on it. I think, you know, this in my mind is kind of like an ideal dyslexia in the school. I'm not going to claim that we're here yet in all districts. I don't know specific details, but I'm happy. I think we have a group of experts here that I'm happy to open it up and we can discuss specifically. But this sort of in my mind is kind of the ideal, what we're hoping to get to once we get their training, once we get through implementation of the high quality curriculum. We have screeners in place, we have intervention programs that are really locked down. So first and foremost, that schools can identify the characteristics of dyslexia, and as you were saying, we can identify them much earlier. And they will qualify a student under a specific learning disability. So while the technical term won't say dyslexia, specific learning disability and basic reading and or fluency, they can have both, they can have just one. That really is sort of those characteristics of dyslexia. There is guidance from the federal government Department of Education that says you can include dyslexia if, you know, there's no law saying you can't say it, but specific learning disability and basic reading and or fluency are sort of where dyslexia lies. Another thing, you're not required to have a medical diagnosis to qualify for an IEP. This can be evaluated in the school. And again, as we develop more tools and more understanding of what these characteristics are and where the deficits are, we can now assess for them. And if a student is found to have a deficit in those areas, they can qualify based on their need and how it's impacting their access to the education and academic growth. So it doesn't require a parent to go out and get a neuropsych. You can do that, but it's not required. And in my case, I went and did that, and the school still said no. She wasn't far enough behind. We wanted to wait till there were a good 2 years of distance between her and grade level, and then we've never been able to make it back. So those are, again, this is what drives me to do this work, that we don't need our kids to suffer.
Right.
Yeah. And it really does. I mean, that emotional toll, that feeling shame, yeah, it's real. And you see it progress through the years, even as their skills get better. I think it's just something that unfortunately stays with. So if we can catch it early, I think we can avoid a lot of that. So I'd mentioned kind of that MTSS, that multi-tiered system of support. Again, kindergarten, first grade, if the school's screening 3 times a year, using an evidence-based instructional curriculum, core curriculum that's based on structured literacy, once they start to see any declines, any risk, they can provide intensive instruction or at least support for students that are struggling with things like phonemic awareness, decoding, spelling, and fluency. And as I said before, sometimes that multi-tiered system of support, if it's evidence-based, if it's intense enough, if it's using data to sort of say, okay, you know, we're good in this area now, let's focus on this. Sometimes that can be enough for a kid with dyslexia, but I'm not sure, you know, again, I don't know all districts, but the ones that I've been in, I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but I think we're heading that way with everything that our teachers are learning. They know what to assess now. You know, before we were kind of just looking at reading comprehension and oral reading fluency, which, you know, they can be okay, but if any of those are below grade level, what is the specific deficit going into those sub skills in Scarborough's reading rope? That's where we really need to target intervention. And I think we're getting smarter as a school to, you know, as a state and as districts to really know, how to look at those sub skills. I don't think, I don't think we were all fully aware that they were there. And then sort of that instructional intervention, it should be, again, that diagnostic, explicit, systematic, sequential, cumulative. So we should go from simple to more complex. We should always kind of revisit the skills before we move on, especially for our kids with dyslexia. And you want it to be sort of targeted. Small group, I personally think is okay if they're matched based on needs. And I've found from a social and emotional standpoint, sometimes that's better because then my daughter doesn't say, hey, it's just me. Clearly, no one else in this school has a problem. So I think there can be benefits, as long as the needs are similar, they don't feel in isolation. So it can be better. Or one-on-one instruction when needed. And like I said before, dyslexic students need a lot of practice and that immediate corrective feedback. And that's really the only way they're going to develop those automatic word recognition skills. We have to practice. I mean, I think thinking of it as a sport, and they got to keep practicing. You have your coach that's there saying, nope, your swing is wrong. This is, that's what these kids need in order to try and develop those more efficient pathways to reading. And then this is just kind of saying the same thing in sort of a summarized way. We at the very basic level now, with that high quality curriculum law that we have in place, we have evidence-based core instruction. It is based on structured literacy. Prior to that, if a child not dyslexic wasn't getting a good evidence-based core instruction, they were struggling. But for our kids, it was, just devastating. They were not getting anything. My kindergarten year, my daughter come off the bus, she would we couldn't even get 10 feet away from the bus, just lose it. She was holding it in all day, couldn't figure out what was going on, not understanding. So I think having that core instruction to be evidence-based, and now that we're requiring it, again, no program, even at the core instruction level, no program is perfect. Sometimes we have to combine two programs, but if we now have the knowledge to know how to critically look at these programs and not just, take the study that the developer did, we can be critical of it. We can be, good consumers like we are when we buy a car. You do a little bit of research. So now when someone comes to say, hey, this curriculum is great, we have very knowledgeable educators and administrators who can say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, or this looks good. So I think we can be much better consumers of curriculum and be more critical of it, and let the teachers own that. They know what to do, so they'll use it, as appropriately.
I have a question in the chat. It says, I may have missed this, but how is this diagnosed or assessed?
Oh, dyslexia
Yeah.
diagnosed. So yeah, I guess I probably didn't go into all of that. That would have been probably a good page slide to have. So it's again sort of historically or moving forward. I think we're kind of in a bit of a transition area, and I guess that question, diagnosed from a medical standpoint or from a school and wanting to look at supports for the student, those can be obviously a little bit different, as we discussed. So it's starting to see the deficits in that sort of word recognition side of things. It can be apparent. I'm sure a lot of you started to notice things. Maybe teachers did notice things as well. But it's starting with that screening and looking to see where kids are behind, where you see the deficits, then going into more diagnostic testing and really trying to drill into what area is it. again, it can be that sort of phonological awareness side of things, kind of hearing and understanding and separating the sounds and putting them together. And or it can be that fluency piece, which is sort of that orthographic mapping and automatization of decoding. So those are sort of the areas that you would want either through the school, either maybe through MTSS or special ed teacher or reading specialist would be diagnosing or testing for that, looking at deficits, and then that's how a student can be qualified, either a lack of response to intervention in the MTSS program if they're not making adequate progress, or if they are just significantly behind once you do the testing. If you see that they are already, you know, again, where we used to have to wait to get to, if they're heading in that direction, the school can intervene right away. From a medical diagnosis, you know, things like neuropsychological examinations, it's still looking at very similar assessments and diagnostic tests. It goes a little bit further and looks at even more in-depth testing. I don't always know. I don't know how other parents feel, but you know, there is a lot of testing, and sometimes I'm not always sure that it leads to better instruction. So again, as we move forward, my hope is that we can get really efficient with the testing piece and really act on the data, as opposed to, well, let's get one more piece of data. You know, if it's needed, I'm all for it. But sometimes I feel like we're collecting a lot of data, but then we're not necessarily letting it inform instruction. So I think that's an area that we can move to. I don't know if that was helpful. Sorry, I should have put up a
That's
basic
fine.
slide.
I think that's any other question? Okay, perfect.
So this, we can go to that next one. So this one, I'm a data person, and when I first came across The Ladder of Reading by Nancy Young, it sort of looks at a lot of data from a lot of resources and says, this is kind of, you know, under a balanced literacy approach, under a non-structured literacy, not explicit, not systematic, not diagnostic approach to literacy. We kind of had kids fall into these four buckets. And what they saw over time, you know, consistently, is that top 5% are kids that seem to just pick up reading on their own. They really don't, you know, maybe that way was already kind of starting to be developed. They really seem to, they're going to learn to read no matter what. And because it comes easy, they typically become, you know, they read more, and then they build that language comprehension side. They become very, very skilled. I need my glasses for this one. Then we have sort of that next tier, about 35% kids seem to learn. They do need some instruction, broad instruction, maybe a little bit of phonics, you know, sprinkled in, but they seem to be able to pick up on the code and the sequence and become proficient readers. The next group, which is the majority where students fall, that 40 to 50%, they're close to proficient, but they're not. So they really do need a structured literacy approach. They need explicit, systematic, and diagnostic instruction in order to become a skilled reader. And then at the bottom, we have our kids with learning disabilities, with dyslexia, that they absolutely require it. They are not going to get out of that bottom tier without lots of opportunities, intensive instruction in that sort of explicit and systematic and diagnostic way. So when I saw this and I look at our RICAS data, it really matches up, which is kind of crazy to me, but these are 2 years before the pandemic, a year into the pandemic. And you can see sort of that 5% of kids exceeding expectations, about 35% meeting expectations. We have that big group of kids, the majority partially meeting. And then that group
Sorry,
at the
I'm missing
bottom, which is, oh, that's good, which is you know, a little bigger than what the ladder of reading shows, but I'm hopeful that once we, you know, once we're fully implementing our structured literacy, you know, screening, having a strong MTSS program, that we're going to move these numbers. Because there is sort of a thought, I don't know if I've found the data behind it specifically, but that up to 95% of kids should be able to become proficient readers. You know, there's sort of just that 5% where it's really going to be a challenge or struggle. So I'm hopeful that we'll change it, but this was just, I don't know, it's something that to me, you know, without that structured literacy approach, we're kind of matching the data that this is sort of our normal distribution if we're not explicitly taught phonics. And then I've spoken a lot about our legislation that's in place, and this is just sort of an update kind of where we are. So in 2019 was when the legislation passed, which was the high quality curriculum and materials, which looks at that core classroom instruction. And then the Right to Read Act, which is where our educators become either proficient or aware based on sort of their, you know, how involved they are in teaching reading. So elementary reading specialists and special ed teachers have to become proficient in the science of reading. And everyone else has awareness training so that they at least are aware of it and sort of can understand it, how it relates to their area of instruction or their interaction with students. So on the high quality curriculum, by the end of this school year, so by a couple weeks from now, all districts will need to have chosen and started to implement their high quality instructional material for ELA and math. Science, I think, is maybe 2025. Or maybe it got pushed.
I think it got pushed.
Okay, probably.
Yeah.
I haven't kept up with that one. The ELA one, I'll admit, is the one I mostly care about. So that will be in place for every district. And then in terms of the Right to Read Act, an update from RIDE is that by the end of 2024, they feel like at least 75% of all teachers within the state will have completed their professional learning, which I think is pretty impressive. And then by September of 2025 is when the Right to Read law kicks in, and that teachers have to have gone through the training or somehow demonstrated proficiency. All public school teachers will have to have this training. So again, I'm very hopeful for kind of where those not coming.
That's all that's. Oh,
Are they not there?
no,
Oh, man. Why
I
I just remember.
no,
I have lots of data and information in those boxes.
yeah.
That would not be my. I wonder if it's maybe it's a font that.
Oh, maybe because I'm on Google Slides and I download to Google Slides and not PowerPoint. That could be why.
Oh, sorry.
No, no, be fair.
Yeah.
It probably didn't
Oh,
pull it
man.
through if it was a different. No big deal.
Well, I can PDF it and you'll have, but so
Yeah.
that's what it says under there. Right, sorry, now I'll make sure to pay attention. All right, we can go on.
I think that's the only thing so far. Though.
Oh, good. I hope so. I wasn't paying attention. So this kind of just partnering with your school, and I think, you know, it's tough when, you know, depending on where you are in your journey, there are times of crisis, you know, as a parent, none of us want our to see our child struggle. And again, sort of depending where you are and where all of these laws and training and great curriculum and screening hit, you know, it might be very beneficial, or for some of us, myself included, you know, it's not quite as effective, but I still truly believe that partnering with the school, however you can, you know, speaking up as soon as you have concerns. Again, share that family history, share with them, you know, she refuses to read, she doesn't like to read, you know, that all should be discussed right away. And again, now that our teachers have such a, you know, a better shared knowledge on kind of what what to do with these symptoms and this information. Hopefully we can act on it. Another great resource that I love, the National Center on Improving Literacy. They have these really great toolkits, which hit all of these areas: advocating for literacy needs for your child, families and school partnering, supporting students with dyslexia, understanding screening. So they have little videos you can watch. And they also have other sort of very specific steps that you can take. And I'm happy, you know, I didn't go too far into the weeds, but if we want to discuss any specifics, I'm more than happy to. But I think just, you know, even when it's frustrating, even like it's what we have to do as parents. You know, we have to stay involved. I can't tell you how many times, especially again, very early on with my child, and not understanding what instruction was needed once it was finally understood, you know, not really being implemented with fidelity. It was tough, but we got to keep doing it. I'm going to go to the next. And then this just ask a lot of questions, I think is super important, especially as we're moving. You know, how many teachers have been trained? What does the reading instruction look like? It should be explicit, systematic, and evidence-based at this point. You know, are there opportunities for the phonics components that my child is learning to practice? You know, are there decodable texts that really help, especially for kids with dyslexia? It gives them that practice with maybe a phonics pattern that they're learning. So I think ask a lot of questions, get involved, join your local advisory committee, I think, which is I'm on mine. Join Decoding Dyslexia if you're so inclined, but we're here to you know, to try and make this path smoother for our kids moving forward. And I don't know, I mean, if anyone wants to talk more about ideas or has any questions.
Is there another one is there stuff under
Oh,
there?
no, I just
Okay.
went to the next.
All right, so this one. All right, I was like,
Fine.
I'll see.
So these were, again, I wasn't, you know, never quite sure where people are in their journey on this. It sounds like we have probably some seasoned veteran parents here.
I recommend that. Sold a Story.
Yeah.
It's like a life-changing podcast. If anyone hasn't listened to it, educators too. It's amazing. And they just came out with the bonus episode last week.
Yeah.
I guess so.
And I think so her first one, which is, I think it's hard to read. It's that bottom or top, but bottom right one. It was about, that was her first documentary. And that came out in 2017. So my daughter, I think, was 4th grade. So I was in the thick of it. I was in panic mode because each year was going by and we weren't making progress. And now we were moving. Our 4th grade is physically housed in the middle school. So they followed a middle school schedule. So I was up against, you know, I could demand time for reading, but then what was gonna be lost, you know, like, is it fair to take every co-curricular away when a kid is already, you know, really working hard all day? So I was in complete panic mode and kind of crisis. And so hearing that first documentary, I was like, wow, it's not just me, you know, and so her work has been so instrumental, I think, in terms of a lot of awareness on, you know, educators speaking, legislators speaking, changes in our laws. She's really, really dove into it and done a really good job, I think.
Yeah.
Going through it. And it started with dyslexia, you know, because that was sort of what it was thought to be. But then as she sort of looked and said, wait a minute, our tier 1 instruction is really not based on all this data that we're looking at. If you use things like a Lucy Calkins or a reader writer workshop, it really wasn't providing what we know is needed to get kids to learn how to read. So that one is really good. Whole series. Our website, I'll plug it, but my colleague Shannon Saglio has done an amazing job curating so many resources. things about dyslexia, parent resources, and this can, a lot of these go into the nitty gritty of IEPs, meetings, what to do. There's some templates in there if you need to write a letter. There's resources for schools and for educators as well. Again, we really want to be an organization that, at our heart, we're parents, we support parents, but I think what I've learned is that the only way we're going to make real change is if we come together and really have that common understanding and knowledge of what needs to be done and work together. So we try to create resources for professionals and parents alike. So encourage you to check out the resources there. Yeah, just hopefully all that came up. Okay. This is some RIDE resources and also Ripen, the Rhode Island Parent Information Network, who I would say kind of historically, they're very good at kind of procedural questions if you call in and you ask in terms of timelines or, prior written notices, things like that. But they really didn't have a lot of depth in dyslexia. A grant that was through RIDE for, was it SPDIG, the Professional School Personnel Development Grant, I think is what it stands for. There was a component in there to really do some outreach and make sure that parents also understand, can get educated on signs of dyslexia, on what their child should be receiving for instruction. So that's gone through Ripen now. And they put on these two, they're on their YouTube site for Ripen, and the links are here, and hopefully you can just send out the slides. I'm fine with that. Just recently in April and earlier in this month, they put on these presentations with a literacy specialist from RIDE, speaking about dyslexia and then structured literacy and what that should look like and what questions you should be asking of your child's teacher and district. So those are really good resources. RIDE put together this Padlet, which I think is an educative tool. Doesn't exist in my world, but lots of, Ripen, all of their resources around dyslexia and structured literacy. You can just go to this Padlet. You don't even have to, it'll send you to the different websites, IDA references as well. And then some things from like the Reading League and ways that parents can support their kids at home. So just another good opportunity. And then this, again, hopefully you'll get these slides so you can just click away if you want. Reading Rockets, I think, has a lot of good information, but it's available for parents. I mean, I know I sometimes get into the very technical stuff and then I realize, wait a minute, I'm not an educator. I joined with Kara. I was in a book club. They were all professors, and I'm like, what am I doing here? It was fun. I learned a lot, but I realized like sometimes I have to this is not where I want my focus to be. So sites like Reading Rockets, I think they do get into the details, but it's at a much more accessible level, at least from my perspective. Again, that National Center on Improving Literacy has a lot of great resources for families. Some of the infographics I think I put out here if anyone wants to take a look at. The Middle Tennessee State University Center for Dyslexia, that's Tim Odegaard, who I think has, I don't know, did he already do some work with RIDE, or was it about? He did, yeah. Lots of great resources on there. Even looking at kind of, it's a lot geared towards Tennessee, but what I liked in there's very specific examples of things like with response to intervention or MTSS. Here's what each tier should look like, and here's kind of what they recommend for, intensive. How often, how many times a week? Because I think that, at least for me as a parent, you don't know. And I know in some districts there's sort of just this, or there was prior to where we are now, kind of like a 15 minutes 3 times a week. It was always like, how did we end up on this? Or, we're not seeing progress. So what can we do? We can intensify the time. We can, maybe move to afternoons to mornings if the child, I know that makes a big difference. My daughter is done come 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I like the resources there. They're very sort of specific and helpful. Again, they're kind of geared what Tennessee is following, but it's always good to, you can bring those back to your district and say, hey, here's what these experts are recommending. Understood.org has a lot of great parent resources. And then those are all kind of the ride and ripen stuff. So I think that might be it. The other ones were just kind of Shannon likes a lot of videos, so she put in a bunch of videos. I'm like, we don't necessarily like to sit here while we watch videos, so you'll have access to them. And they are the experts then that are speaking. Not that I think I should be speaking over experts, but I thought you can watch those. So I thank you all for your
No, thank you.
time and
Thank you for coming. Thank
attention.
you for your time.
Thank you.
And if there's anything that, again, I know we're all at different spots, but
Right.
if there's anything we can do to help or specific questions anyone wants to address. On our website, there's a contact form. You can share my
Perfect.
email. And we're just, we're here to support everyone, teachers, parents. But ultimately it's to get our kids, to where they deserve to be and where they're capable of being. So.
Anybody have any questions, comments for these?
I just wanted to ask things about the structure. So before you go, I don't want to take everybody else's time. I had a lot of trouble finding any information on curriculum and speaking sequence. Anything online? Anything, share any of that information?
Yeah, I can ask Carrie on our board. Like I said, I know she reviewed it. I don't know, do you guys have, since it is something that,
Yeah, it's right on their website, but I
Okay.
can send you a link.
okay. Yeah,
Is it the actual, are you looking for like actual curriculum? If not, can he like go to the admin building and view it?
that's
If,
what,
It's actually, it's
oh,
all.
all of it's online? Because I know some programs are copyright. This one, you can view everything?
Yeah,
when I
mean,
looked, it talks a lot about the training as opposed
the
to,
training, and there's like some sample activities that are on there, and there's some resources.
Like every time I went and tried to search something on it, you know how to buy the curriculum itself.
I was
Uh,
gonna say that is what I saw a lot of, so that's why I asked Carrie. I sort of put it on her because I think she actually had the
Okay.
materials. So, another thing too that I think it's Cheraho that I learned when we were at the Right to Read film, doing literacy nights for parents. I think, especially if new curriculum is being.
That's on our
Yeah,
list of next year's thing. I
Yeah.
want to kind of what we saw at
Yep.
Rick. We went to our Right to Read movie and it was great, but something like that I would love to
Yeah.
bring to our
I
district for
thought the
educators and for
same thing
parents.
as I was
Yeah.
watching Cheraho.
It's in our, we've been chatting, yeah, it's in our
Talk about
plans for.
that. And I just think like, being proactive so that parents can kind of, it's like a black box sometimes, and especially if they're not kind of understanding all of this work that's going on, like we want to celebrate the work, in my opinion, that you guys are doing. So, and I don't know, I'm speaking mostly from my own district. So, I say that like let's get this information out there that some teachers in our district have gone above and beyond and did the practicum. And now we have 6 teachers when we had 0. So if I think parents would appreciate and really, respect that work's being put in, and then visions for where we're going. This is what we chose for this training, for this curriculum, and this is why, because I think I have heard even within this district, just in the time from when it was announced that we were going to speak, was sort of, there was Wilson structures, like why and what. So maybe again, just letting some parents kind of know, what the thought process was there, where your vision is for where you're going with it. I think that, would be very helpful.
Yeah, I know for me, I mean, I have a 4th grader, so
Mhm.
he's in Wilson right now, but I never heard of
Yeah.
structures. And now I'm like, that'll be my mission.
And right now, she is Wilson, now we're going to structures, like how do they
Mm,
work together?
Yeah, how do they,
Follow.
that's a good one.
Yeah, is there any gaps? or
Yeah,
is
sort
there
of,
any,
is
yeah?
there a transition plan? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
the structure is very similar in terms of the amount of time that's dedicated to each set of skills and the way that it's implemented, but we can
Just thinking in terms of.
Yeah,
I
because
know
Wilson steps. So like.
steps
I
and
know
also
what you're saying,
their,
yeah.
their way of doing things and their tapping versus, you know, like, is there gonna be
There
a
was
transition
based
for
on
kids?
Orton Gillingham, which isn't a program,
Right,
but more that science.
yeah,
of reading,
just
so-
thinking if they're, you know, if a kid's been in Wilson for a while and they get
Right, yeah, they
in
get
that
used to,
routine, is there, you know, thoughts of how to transition? If it's slightly different, I mean, I have to imagine there must be some differences.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, I think these are conversations that I hope that each district. you
right,
know,
yeah, that's a big one to
can
have.
So Carrie will probably give you a very thorough feedback on the program, but I think too, yeah, if you know, if it's possible to get it from the district, I think
Yeah.
that's great.
Any other questions, comments? All right, thank you so much for coming. This was great. So
Thank you,
I'm happy to
guys.
bring this to the district and
It was helpful.
keep it going. Yes, it was very, very helpful. Thank you so much. Are we gonna take like,
Anything else?
yeah, absolutely. We're gonna take like a 5-minute break, just so these can not have to sit through the rest of our stuff. We could like